Hi, everyone. Welcome this afternoon. My name is Lynn Mooney. I'm co-owner of Women and Children First Bookstore in Chicago. And we begin our virtual events the same way we used to begin our in-store events, and that's with a native land acknowledgement. Join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria and Potawatomi people. There are more than 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native history, literature, and community. We encourage all of you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing this afternoon's event. And I do honestly encourage you to do that. A little bit about the store. We are open. Doors are open. People are actually walking around inside our space as we speak. So whether you're in Chicago or anywhere else, we'd love to be your bookstore, especially your feminist bookstore. You can shop womenandchildrenfirst.com. We do contactless curbside pickup. We do shipping. And again, you are welcome any day to walk through our door. We would love to see you. For everyone here today, just want you to know how things will work. If you have a question for Lori or Jamie, please put it in the Ask a Question field. We like to save the chat for other kinds of enthusiasm, and we don't want to make it too hard for the authors to find your questions because we want them to answer them. Also, we would be delighted if you'd buy the book from us. You can tap on that Buy the Book box, and it's nearly done. So thank you. And now to the matter that brings us all here. I'm so pleased to be introducing Lori Rader-Day. She is the Edward Award nominated and Anthony and Mary Higgins Clark Award winning author of 6 books, including The Lucky One, Under a Dark Sky, and The Day I Died. She was the 2020 National President of Sisters in Crime and is co-chair of the Murder and Mayhem in Chicago conference. I have to say, Death at Greenway had me guessing till the very end. There were some very interesting twists and turns. I loved that there were 2 women named Bridey Kelly. And I loved how the mystery worked both as a really solid, wonderful, satisfying historical mystery, but really also as a coming of age story of this young, naive woman named Bridey Kelly. And like I said, right till the end, he had me. Also with us this afternoon is JC Bernthal. He is the author of Queering Agatha Christie, Revisiting the Golden Age of Detective Fiction, and the editor of The Ageless Agatha Christie, Essays on the Mysteries and the Legacy, and with Rebecca Mills, co-editor of Agatha Christie Goes to War. Welcome, both of you. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. And thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And thank you to Women and Children First. Women and Children First is one of my hometown stores. It's maybe a couple of miles away from my house, but it's a great store. If anybody in Chicago hasn't been there yet, definitely stop by if you can. With masks, we aren't going crazy yet. So thank you so much, Jamie, for doing this event with me. I cooked up this idea when Jamie and I did a panel together for a conference for the Malice Domestic, More Than Malice virtual conference. And I just had fun talking to you on that panel. And I sort of thought, I think there might be a fun evening of, well, evening for you, it's tea time for me. So cheers. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I jumped at the chance and massively sort of got very excited, and I'm worried about just becoming a sort of sickly fan in your presence, but I'll do my best to keep it professional.
Oh, that doesn't sound bad. Doesn't sound bad at all. Well, I actually, you may have seen my face when she said the author of 6 books. I'm like, really? 6, huh? Okay.
6 excellent books.
A little surprising to me as well.
And reading Death at Greenway was the best kind of homework imaginable for this event. It was wonderful. Such a good book. So
thank
I'm
you.
really looking forward to getting dug into that in the next half hour or so.
Yay. Okay, so we'll talk about Death at Greenway, absolutely. But I want to talk a little bit about your work, because I think, especially for Women and Children First, which is a feminist bookstore, it's LGBTQIA friendly, and it's just been like a center for the gay community in Chicago. So I just want to talk a little bit about Queering Agatha Christie, because I think that's it's your dissertation, is it not?
Yeah, it was my PhD, and then that turned into the first monograph, which was Queering Agatha Christie.
Amazing. So I just think it's so interesting. So I wrote this little thing about Agatha Christie for this event, where I said, it's basically not quite a little mini essay, but the first lines are, Agatha Christie wasn't a feminist. I love her anyway. Oh, shots fired. Uh-oh. One might think that a woman who watched her widowed mother struggle on alone after her father died, unable to earn a living because she could not work based on the status that she had, would have the right spirit. But Agatha was a product of her time and her upbringing in many ways, and in her personality, very shy. So she became a woman who was the breadwinner in both of her marriages, I think, and supported herself in between the marriages with her daughter after her divorce, or famously got divorced. And then who fought to be taken seriously with her publishers as the expert on her own work. To me, that sounds like a feminist. But and in any case, she's been an inspiration to so many writers, so many women writers who gladly claim that title, myself included. So I would just like, what do you think about Agatha as a feminist or not? Do you have any thoughts that come to mind?
I'm probably not the best person to offer an opinion on it, but it is a huge debate actually in academic land, where I come from, where we sort of sap the fun out of everything, and that is our form of vampiric fun. It's been a raging debate since probably the 1980s, when there was an essay published by Marty Knepper called Agatha Christie Feminist. And the thing is, Christie herself would definitely never have used that term of herself. But at the same time, a lot of the heroines in her books and the struggles that characters face in her books, which are a lot more nuanced than a lot of people give them credit for, they are many of the same things that were being discussed in contemporary feminism at the time and continue to be discussed. And she is someone who gave all her characters, indiscriminately of who or what they are, they're given the dignity of being allowed to be absolutely awful and also good and complex, more than we like to think, because we see the shiny stereotype, we see the TV adaptations, and they're all quite easy to follow, which the books are too, but there's something very psychologically nuanced there. Mm-hmm. And she sees women as people, which is not a given for a lot of 20th century writers. So in that sense, there's a lot of feminist criticism finds a lot of value in Christie, and she has been claimed as a feminist. She's also been critiqued as someone who wouldn't have called herself a feminist. But I mean, if she was around today, I would be surprised if she didn't claim that word. It just felt a lot more loaded to her at the time, being an upper middle class, relatively conservative woman.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there are people today who, women today who will not take the title, but they, they're able to act in ways, they're able to work and earn a living, and it's on the shoulders of feminism that they can do a lot of this decisions for their own life. But I read the introduction to Queering Agatha Christie. I am not an academic at heart. I just have to say that. But I learned a lot. So this, you're kind of talking about, the way that she gave full personhood to all her characters. I mean, it's kind of what you're saying about the queering of Agatha Christie. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what you learned in your monograph? I like the monograph word.
Monograph, yes.
Monograph. It sounds better when you say it, though. It's the accent, I think.
See, you have an accent to me. So.
I know. I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Cute,
Christie, Queering Christie is it was an unusual thing when I did it. It's less unusual now, but people were surprised. And so what a lot of people would say to me was, oh, I didn't know she was gay. And she wasn't. And we don't really have gay characters in her books. There are some, and there are others that people have spotted as gay, but I wasn't particularly interested in looking for specifically LGBT characters or LGBTQ plus characters. I wanted to look at how we can, as a queer person and part of various queer communities, I wanted to look at how these books can be useful or relevant to us, and what we can find in the books that informs what we're dealing with in life. And the big thing because the thing about being called queer is not often used as an insult now, but it was, and that's why the word was reclaimed in activism and later in that vampiric discipline of academia, sort of stealing things from the real world. It's reclaiming a slur, and queer means not normal, not right, wrong. And so the idea is, if you're telling people they're queer, what you're actually doing is telling them I'm normal. And what I wanted to look at in the Queering Agatha Christie was to look at how people label other people in the books and say, you're wrong, you're a deviant, you're a criminal, you're a pervert or whatever. And there's a lot of that in the books, and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they're just trying to say, I'm normal, I'm right, I'm proper. But what's so fascinating about a lot of crime fiction, but especially Agatha Christie, is they're all hypocrites. They're all hiding something. Everyone's got this guilty little secret, and the most prim and proper and normal people are anything but. And in fact, so what really sort of turned me on to this is, if you do get a queer character, like a character who's a man who acts like a woman or something, and that was the coding that they would use at the time. So if a man comes on with an effeminate voice and a lisp and a limp wrist,
That's hard to say. That is very hard to say.
it's 10:30 for me. I should be in bed with Coco, but this is better. So if a man comes on with a limp wrist and a lisp, and the reader in 1930 might think, oh, he's an unsavory sort, I bet he's the murderer. And of course, Agatha knows you're going to say this, going to think this. And so he's going to be the last person who'll be the killer. And the murderer will be the church warden or someone like that. And that's an example from a specific novel, has exactly that set up. And so what I wanted to do there is look at, well, this is really interesting because she's using our prejudices against us. And whether she's doing it just so she can create a good puzzle or something more sinister, she is forcing us to examine our prejudices. And that's fascinating. So she's using and manipulating the way we think we're meant to think.
Yeah.
And I could go on forever, but this is an event about your book and I want you to speak.
I love that. I love that example. Which novel is that? I can't remember. I have to tell you, I haven't read all of her books. There are 66 novels plus 14 short story collections plus 4 under a different name plus. Do you remember which novel that was? I'm so jealous
of you.
To be able to read them for the first time.
Read them afresh, yes. Yeah. I have a friend, John Curran, who has talked about I have a friend, not John Curran, sorry. He's great, and he has this encyclopedic knowledge of all the books. But I have another friend who also has an encyclopedic knowledge of all the books and has talked about hypnotizing himself so that he can forget who did it and go back and start again. It's so much fun.
I mean, ask him, did it work? Can we all do it? That would be amazing. What I'm doing right now is I'm kind of going back. I'm not sure that I've read, I don't remember which ones I have read and which ones I haven't, because I started a long time ago. And as I think you did as well. And so I don't really remember exactly which ones I have and which one so I'm just going to start from the beginning and work my way forward. I actually showed that I had bought, I think it's like one of the first Poirot, and my friend Katrina was like, I thought you were a fan. I'm like, no, I've read this before. I'm pretty sure, but I want to read it again. I'm doing some rereading here.
You can
which brings
reread
me
them.
to the, well, first of all, I want to stop and say, John Curran is your friend. I'm a fan.
I hope he's my friend. I like him.
John, we both want you to like us. So I don't know if I want to break into this yet, but John Curran is directly responsible for Death at Greenway, because I was reading The Secret Notebooks of Agatha Christie in bed, just getting started. And in the introduction, he talks very flippantly, half a sentence, about how Greenway House was used to house child evacuees during World War II. And that little like 5 words of a like as though everyone already knew all this, pinged something very deep inside me. And I thought, well, I have to read that book. I want to read it. And then I tried to look for it, and nobody had written it yet. So John Curran, if you're watching, we both love you. We both want to be friends with you. And I want to thank you for that book. But let's, I don't want to go too far into that right now, because I would love to talk about our origin story.
Yes, I will pick you up on that.
We already did that, but like how we became Agatha Christie fans. And how did you first Agatha Christie? How did you first discover her?
Tell you mine if you tell me yours.
Okay.
So how did I start? I was tender age of 8, and I know I'd run out of Roald Dahl to read, and I didn't like children's books except Roald Dahl, because he got it that people are awful, and that's a recurring theme, it seems. Sorry, but he all the children's books I was reading were very patronising and awful, and so we went to the library. And there was this, actually, it was one of these books, which are old books published in the 70s. And they are, you get two books in each one. And they are illustrated. So that was like a nice gateway to adult books. And I saw one called Curtain. And I thought, oh, I like drama and the theatre. That sounds good. Now, Curtain is the last Poirot novel, and spoilers, but he dies. So it was a really, really bad one to start with, but my mum helped me read it. And then I went and picked one up off my granddad's bookshelf, which was Lord Edgware Eyes, which I'm still in love with, and is a super, super queer book, incidentally, but we can go back to that later. Yeah, and then actually I was trying to write, because I thought I'll be a murder mystery writer.
Well, you could be. I mean, if I can do it, you absolutely could.
At the moment, I just love reading them, and you provide them brilliantly. So I want to know your Agatha origin story.
Well, interestingly, we have something in common here. You having picked up the last Poirot as your first Christie. I am pretty sure that one of my very first Christie books that I read was Sleeping Murder, which is the last Marple.
Yes.
And I didn't know what the hell was going on, Jamie. I remember that. I was like, this is great, but I don't know what this is about, because there's a lot of referential stuff in there to art and classic literature that I had no idea what was going on. So I believe that I discovered Agatha at age 11, so much more mature than 8. 11 is much more. So I used to go to my hometown library in Lebanon, Indiana, all the time. My mom would walk me and my sister there, and we'd come back, carrying a big stack of kids' books every week. And so I went through the children's section of the library pretty quickly. And I think I was bothering the librarian by saying, oh, what else should I read? What else should I read? And one day she was like, kid, I think you've done it. I think you've read everything down here. So why don't you go upstairs and get out of my hair, right? Go with somebody else. She sent me upstairs, but the problem was I was only 11 and my mom was upstairs, and I knew that I was not an adult to be, she was going to send me back down. In fact, I was kind of worried that any librarian I encountered upstairs was going to send me back down. So I was kind of worried about, passing by the scary desk at the top of the stairs. So I ducked into the doorway that was right before the desk, and it was the mystery room. Just by accident, it was the mystery room. And so I found my first Agatha Christie's in there, and Mary Higgins Clark was the other one that I discovered way too early. But I mean, I think that those two writers together are pretty much responsible for the writer I eventually became. I give a lot of credit to Agatha for being like my first adult, books. And yeah, I didn't know what was going on quite a bit, but I knew that I enjoyed them, that I had found something that I really liked.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's part of her brilliance as a writer, is that she can engage on so many levels. Like there is the mystery element, there are also the characters and just the sheer fun of the dialogue, because I mean, it's dated now. It's a world that's vanished, but it's also a world that was never really there for the people reading her, unless they happened to go to country houses every weekend and on luxury cruises and things, which not everyone did. So it is that lovely escapism.
So many different people read her, right? Like I obviously don't go to country houses and I don't go on luxury cruises, but we still find something in them that is enjoyable. So one of the things I picked out of your introduction to Queering Agatha Christie was something about like Christie's popularity. Like historian Julian Simmons said he put this down to Christie's permanence, put it down to the comfort of the familiar. And here's a quote from the book. Simmons acknowledged a limited audience. Few feminists or radicals are likely to read her. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Another quote. The repetitive predictability at the heart of the Christie phenomenon, that comfort of the familiar, means that apparently secure solutions are never absolute. I mean, what do you think about the people who sort of put down her writing, who don't get it the way that you and I get it? What do you think about the snobs? Let's talk about the snobs.
The snobs. Well, they're just not as cool as you and I, are they? You and me, you and I. Yeah, they're just not as cool.
They're not as cool.
So I think they don't get it because they don't want to get it. And sometimes there is an element of jealousy, I think, because a lot of it used to be really fashionable for crime writers to totally diss Agatha Christie because she was the best-selling crime writer of all time.
Right.
And, I do have a suspicious, forgiving but remembering eye on some writers who used to position themselves as the anti-Christie and are now saying she's always been their spirit animal, and I know who they are.
Oh, we're going to have to dish after this call is over. I want some names, okay? I don't get it either. I think, best-selling crime writer of all time, only best-selling author of all time behind Shakespeare and the Bible. So figured something out. She figured something out that maybe, and I think that popularity, that's why some people are.
It is the popularity. We have this, it's an ingrained thing, I think. It's like with food. You think anything this good, this nice can't be good for you. And it's not true. Like, apples are objectively delicious, and Agatha Christie is objectively a very clever and very good and very worthy writer. But it is the idea that popular can't be good. But also, I think there's misogyny at play. There is an element that because she's a woman. And I remember when I wanted to study Agatha Christie on my first degree, my first dissertation was on the theology of Agatha Christie. And I was told by a member of my university department, why would you want to write about Mrs. Christie? If you want to do a woman, you can do Virginia Woolf. She's good.
Oh,
so
no. Mrs. Christie.
Mrs. Christie. Yeah. So there is that element that we can't quite take her seriously. But I think mainly because she's easy to read. And honestly, anyone who is that successful has to be doing something right. And even if it's not in the same way as Virginia Woolf.
Right.
So
there's lots of room for different kinds of writers, but there's some jealousy sort of built into, okay, but she's taking up all this room. She's taking up all these sales. Even with the pandemic, a lot of the book sales are, I mean, her backlist is on fire right now, I think, which is good for, her publishers. And I think, comfort reading. What is wrong with comfort reading? Something that you're going to enjoy when the world is kind of awful.
Exactly. And it's also, it is something that tackles big themes and big issues and big ideas in a way that helps you understand them or process what's going on. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is a lot good with that. And I mean, part of the reason Christie is so popular now, and books about Christie are also popular at the moment, is I know. If nothing else, I'm forcing at least 100 people to read your book. It's amazing. They won't need forcing, but I will be festooning people with it, if that's the word, bestowing it all Christmas for sure.
Oh, thank you.
But at the moment, I don't want to be political, but we are in contentious and divided times at the moment. I think that's a fair point to say. It's not a certain time at the moment. And of course, in the 1930s and 1940s, things were also troubled, and people had things they needed to escape from, uncertainties and conflicts and confusions. And so, of course, crime fiction, and especially Christie was the queen of crime then, as she is now, rose exponentially. And I was writing something about the war recently and looking through the mass observation archive. And they had this report on habits of the reading public, and the people compiling the report were really confused and surprised that literacy and reading had gone up, and people were reading detective stories. And they were saying, you'd think they'd take things a little more seriously now. They didn't say it like that, but they were surprised that although people were reading more, they were reading more detective stories, even up to the level of serious readers, was what they said.
Oh, no. Mass observation was one of the things I discovered researching for Death at Greenway. And then I'm like, I got to put this in there. I don't know. I just have to put it in there. And nobody I know, everyone's always like, now, is that a real group? Is that cool? And I'm like, it absolutely is. And I could have written an entire book about mass observation, but I was already deep into this thing. So. I think so. It would be fun, right?
Absolutely. I'd read it. I cheered a little when it came up. So it does feature quite relatively prominently in Death at Greenway. And, because I just put away my horrible writing task to indulge, and there it was.
And there it was.
So maybe you could tell me a little more about there must have been phenomenal research involved in this book.
It absolutely was a lot of research, and I could do 6 days of research talk about Death at Greenway. The first thing to know is that I'm not a researcher. I am traditionally contemporary crime novelist. So all those other books that Lynn mentioned at the beginning were set in contemporary times in Chicago, in the Midwest, where I'm from Indiana. A lot of them were set either there or with people who were from there. Places I had been, places I had lived, places I had worked. I don't like to do research, so that's me saving myself a lot of time. And I don't like prep work that much. I really like to just sort of figure out 2 or 3 things, that might help me get started with just a scene. And then I just start writing and I figure out stories from there. It's not a great way to live, but then I don't think I would do it if I knew exactly where I was going in a story. So that's how I make it fun for me. The discovery is part of it. But for Death at Greenway, all I have is that little 5-word thing from John Curran's book, and then went to look, and no one's written this story, and also no one's written about that episode. Really, just like half sentences here and there. Maybe in your life, you've encountered some of these little moments where they just breeze past it. It was hard to research. And I also don't have, I'm not a historian. I don't have, really a background in historical research of any kind. So I really had to figure out how to do it and then do it, or learn as I go, I guess. One of the best things I did was, for online research was the genealogy websites, becoming a member there and trying to figure out who was in the house. Briefly, for anyone who's watching who doesn't know, the story is about the children who were taken to Greenway House, Agatha Christie's beloved holiday home during World War II. It's based on a real thing, but again, not collected in any way. So the first thing I did was some research trying to figure out who was there in the house. The most useful document was the 1939 register. So you could actually see, who the register census document to show who was in every place all on the same day. And you could see, Agatha Christie, Malowan, authoress. That I love the word authoress. I had to use that in the book for sure. And Max Mallowan, archaeologists, their ages, their birth dates. Hers was wrong because I think someone was answering for her. I don't think it was her giving the information. That's my guess. I don't think she was lying.
She did lie about her age.
She could have.
She used to shave a couple of years off. In fact, when she married Max, because he was 14 years younger than her, she shaved a few years off her age on the wedding certificate, and he added a few on. Which
I should have looked that up.
Wonderful.
I love that. Well, I was kind of giving her the benefit of the doubt because it was like 1 year off, and I thought, well, maybe the household staff is answering for them, and how old is she? Okay, and then so 1 year didn't seem like much of a help to me, but I also learned who worked at the house, who lived in the other buildings on the estate, in the guest house, or not in the guest house, in the not in the boathouse, the ferryman's cottage, and at the gatehouse. And I had sort of been looking specifically for the butler and the cook, who Agatha says in her autobiography she left behind when she goes to London to care for this group. So that was specifically someone I knew. Okay, they were there, but they're not in the register. So who are they? And there's a man who was sort of famously Agatha's butler, and I thought, okay, he seems like a great character, great. But I found in my research that he had actually not worked for her until, they kept saying the 50s, and I'm like, well, he could have been there in the 40s too. But somewhere I found that he had interviewed with her at one of her many residences, and it was one of the residences that she didn't have until 1948. So look at me learning historical research. But then I found with a little bit of help from the Christie estate, they gave me the name that could be, maybe this is the person. There's a lot of letters, what she's saying, I'll have Scaldwell do this, or I'll send Scaldwell on this errand, in her letters to Max. So Scaldwell, that's what I had. And I found Frank Scaldwell and his wife Vera Scaldwell living in Eton at during the register, butler and cook. And by triangulating some other information that I had, confirmed that that was the real couple, and did the same thing kind of for the Arbuthnot's, the couple that brought the children down. I only had the last name because that's all that Agatha says in her autobiography. A Mrs. Arbuthnot. Mrs. Arbuthnot. Not helpful, Agatha. And I had the wrong ones for a short time.
Oh.
I talked to somebody on the genealogy site because she had a family tree that had, these people in it. I'm like, oh, I think you're people. And then I realized, oh, that's not the real people. So I had to go back and tell her, I'm sorry, it wasn't them. And she's like, oh, that's okay. But I'm sort of done with my family tree. What do you need? And she helped me find documents and find the right people, and find a handwritten will on Greenway stationery by Mrs. Arbuthnot. So was able to confirm again completely that was the real people. So these are like the historical writer stuff that I never understood, like the jazzy feeling you get when you're like, yeah, those people were lost to history, and now the real people are in there. So yeah, again,
amazing detective work. And what you have done with these characters is amazing because they are so believable and fleshed out that it's hard to believe that the only information available to you was a name. Especially because I've done like a bit of research into Christie's life, and so I knew the name Arbuthnot because I'd read the autobiography, and she had some letters, I think, with Max or her agent moaning a little bit about the Arbuthnot's in Greenway.
Yes, she did
not. So that was kind of all I knew, and then I don't know if I can say this because I don't think they're meant to be, but they're among my favorite characters in the books just because they're so plausible and annoying in a really good way, compelling way.
I mean, they're not villains, but they're definitely, people,
They're just so believable, and not in the way that some people who are kind of not quite middle class are in historical fiction. There's often a sense of caricature, which, all your characters in all your books that I've read, and especially here, are completely compellingly believable characters, if that makes sense, sort of
Thank you.
Flawed and good and bad and everything. And I just find that so refreshing, especially in historical fiction. The research you've done, what I really appreciate about it, and I am just going to sort of sing your praises for a second, I'm afraid, is two of my pet peeves in historical fiction are either the author is too in love with the period and it's kind of takes on this sense of being their internal monologue, so everyone happens to think exactly the same way as the author, or they've done their research and they want you to know it. So it's like, I walked into the room and put on this song on the gramophone, which had been released exactly 27 weeks ago and had sold exactly 962 copies, and that sort of thing. And you don't do that. You don't even just drop it in. You weave around what you've researched to make something that could only be told that way. And I find that fascinating. So the names, the characters, the places, the music, everything there feels like it's there for an exact reason. And I felt like the butler Scaldwell couldn't be called anything else. I had to Google to find out if that was his real name or just a brilliant authorial.
I mean, were you able to find him by Googling? That was the thing. Like, he wasn't really...
I found an interview with you, so I knew.
Aha!
But
he was
yeah, because it's such a good name.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I had something else, and then when I learned I figured out that was the real guy. I'm like, oh, that's a much better name. And I have his wife, Vera. I wouldn't have called her Vera because there was Vera Lynn, the singer, was, at least relevant to one of the characters in one of the chapters. I would have given her a different name, but that was her real name. So we had, Vera Lynn and Vera Scaldwell. Why not? There's more than one Vera.
There's more than one Bridget as well.
There is. There's more than one Bridget. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. That's actually one of the first things I knew about the book, that they were the original title, that just like before I wrote anything, before I knew anything about, other than I was going to attempt this, was that I would have to rely on those two nurses, two hospital nurses. This is what Agatha calls them in her autobiography. So they were the unknowns. Everybody else, had a name, or the kids were too young. That was one of the things I figured out early. 10 kids, 10 under the age of 5, 2 of them infants. I found out when I finally saw a picture of 9 of them.
So these are the 2 nurses with the children at Greenway during those war years.
Yeah.
And they're both called Bridget Kelly.
Well, that's what I put upon them. They did not have names. So they were the sort of the people that I could manipulate and get into a lot of trouble without really messing with history. My goal was to tell as much of the context using all the facts I could find, because it hadn't been gathered before. And then when I ran out of facts, that's where the fiction would go. But, I kept scratching the surface of what was known and finding more facts, finding out stuff about Scaldwell, finding out stuff about the Arbuthnot's, Mr. Arbuthnot being kind of famous, really. He was a famous photographer and an artist. So that's problematic. Okay. Writing about Agatha was problematic. I did not intend to do it. I kind of wanted to skip that altogether because I love her so much. Getting into her mind was not something I really wanted to try. But then I learned that she and Max and a friend of theirs had been at Greenway in the kitchen listening to the radio when war was announced. And they both wrote about it in their autobiographies. So it was almost like I couldn't avoid it. And then once she was in the story, got to show her coming back once in a while.
Agatha flits in and out of the story, if that's a fair way to put it. She's this wonderful presence who is much discussed as the mistress by the other characters. But I think it's so much stronger for not being Agatha Christie investigates the murders at Greenway kind of thing. And so you have that prologue from her point of view, and then any other time she appears, she is perceived and seen as this wonderful presence, but also this very shy woman who, I think you say at one point, she feels like she should apologize for playing her own piano, or she looks like she feels she should apologize for playing her own piano, which is just this wonderful depiction of the most popular author in the world, even at that point. But she was a very shy woman.
Yeah, by all reports, she would not like all the attention she's still getting, all the books about her. She would not like it. So Agatha, I'm sorry, but if you hadn't been in the Greenway kitchen, this would be a totally different book. But
Greenway.
One other character that I think is worth mentioning is Doreen. Doreen is one of the children, and her character is based almost completely on a letter that the real child named Doreen sent back to the National Trust, who now owns the house, to say, this is what I remember. And if Doreen hadn't written that letter, I don't know what the book would be like. She really put into bullet point, this is what I remember. I remember the butler handing me a cup of water one day, on the stairs. And I remember, and, these little moments made, I think, the whole atmosphere with the children much more real. And I became friends with Doreen. I've got an email I need to reply to from her right now. She's 83 wonderful. Tomorrow. So happy birthday, Doreen. Yes. And the other great thing about researching this book was that I got to go to Greenway twice.
That was my next question.
Have you been there? Have you stayed at the house?
I have. Isn't it wonderful?
It's so good.
The
It's
things
the
we
best.
do for research.
It's the best thing I've ever gotten to do for research. It absolutely is.
So tell me about it.
Well, I went the first time as a tourist and just wandered through. It was raining, so I didn't get to do the grounds very much. But that's when I got to see the cabinet behind the locked door that had the children's names still on it. And that moment, yes, that moment is kind of when the story became mine. Up until then, I still had all this doubt all through this process that I should be the one telling this story. But when I saw the cabinet and those little names on the shelves, I thought, well, I think I have to try. I think I have to, and maybe it helped me think that the history wasn't as ancient as I was kind of thinking it was. It's ancient to me because I was not a historian. I didn't really have the full context. But once I saw those names, I was smitten, and it was going to happen. And then I went back in 2019 with my husband as the guest of the National Trust to stay in the house for 3 nights and wander the grounds and walk to town and take the ferry over to Ditcham, into Dartmouth, and to really live in the house. And that trip was amazing. And also so important to what the book turned out to be. I really got a sense of the place and, what the light was like and what the weather was like and what the house sounded like. I'm so lucky that actually Sophie Hannah was the person who made that connection for me. I got a chance to talk to her about my story. I had just sold it and said, I have to write this now. And she's like, well, you have to talk to Belinda. And I'm like, okay. And so Belinda, who works for the National Trust, made the connection and got us into the house. Which
Lovely.
Was amazing. So you've stayed there? Or you've been there, and I'm sure you've spent a lot of time there.
I have stayed there only one night, but that was Sophie Hannah as well. Because I used to be Sophie Hannah's PA. So I used to be her personal assistant.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And on Agatha Christie's 125th birthday, she was doing an event at the Agatha Christie Festival in Torquay, and they offered her accommodation at Greenway, but she didn't need it. She didn't need it because she had to go somewhere else. And she very kindly said to me, would you like the accommodation at Greenway? And I said, let me check my diary. Yes.
Let me check my schedule.
Oh, no, I booked in at the Travel Lodge, which is like a not fancy hotel. So, yes. So I stayed at Greenway, and it was so much fun on Agatha Christie's 125th birthday.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I just walked around her tennis court, and it was lovely. It was really interesting. But Greenway looms large in your book as, I would say, a character in its own right. And what I think you've captured through the dialogue as well as the descriptions is how Greenway is a place with a breathing history that draws you in. It was, Agatha Christie called it the loveliest place on earth. And I think you talk in the book about how she saw it as a child and coveted it. And sort of was like, one day I want to live there. Or we can imagine her saying that. Maybe she was never quite so presumptuous. But and she actually did fictionalize it in one of her short stories in the 1920s, even before she bought it. Yeah, and then it goes into so many of her novels as a setting, Greenway. And so I imagine there was lots of fun reading there. 5 Little Pigs.
5 Little Pigs. Dead Man's Folly is the one that I read twice because that's the one that she absolutely uses everything about Greenway. She changes the name, but I mean, even the characters, there are characters that she is absolutely using. Mrs. Baston and her family, the gardener's name? Hannaford, the Hannaford Baston generations of family that did the gardening and helped in the house. She absolutely is using the details of their lives for these characters. It's fascinating. And then, I wanted to see how she talked about Greenway. How did she? What words did she use to describe, the drive down and that sort of thing? And it was it was really, really helpful and useful and fun. And reading Agatha books as research is,
And it's an excuse to watch Poirot with David Suchet, because the episode based on Dead Man's Folly, they filmed it in the gardens of Greenway, which is just wonderful.
I love doing all this. I mean, it was hard. Again, it's not my nature to research in quite this way, but I mean, I have been so grateful to have the chance to really do a sort of a passion project. And before we go, I know we're getting close to time. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can put it in the ask a question section at the bottom or in the chat. At this point, it's fine. But I would love to hear about the festival, the conference that you started about Agatha Christie.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so in 2014, I was a lonely PhD student. Well, 2013 when I planned it. And I thought, I wish I had someone to talk about Agatha with. I also wanted to bolster my CV, so I wanted to organize an event. So I said, I'm going to do an Agatha Christie conference. And everyone, okay, whatever. You're doing it yourself, no funding. So I put together these little posters on Microsoft Paint and to advertise an Agatha Christie Day, and stuck them up around the department and then posted them online. And I thought maybe 5 or 6 of my friends will come, which is funny because I don't have 5 or 6 friends. But anyway, I advertised it. I just thought it would just be a few of my friends coming along. And then people started proposing papers, not just from the University of Exeter, but from all over the country, then all over the world. And we had people come in from as far away as Australia, coming in to this tiny little conference. And it was in this cramped little room because I booked a room for 25 people and we had a lot more. We had to cap it at 50. But people were coming in and really excited and then saying, when's the next one? Because everyone wanted to talk about Agatha Christie. So since then, nearly every year, we've done a conference. Now there's a lovely committee of us from various universities across the UK. And we do it now in a different university every year. And it's now a 2-day thing where people from all academic disciplines, but also not from outside academia. So authors come along and do creative takes on Agatha Christie. We have theatre and creative writing workshops and things and exhibitions, and it's just so much fun because we get to geek out about Agatha and meet each other, find other people who get it, and sort of slowly start a cult, I guess. But it's really fun to have this thriving research community about Agatha Christie. And what it has done is led to some publications, like Lynn kindly mentioned one of my books, The Ageless Agatha Christie, and that is the proceedings of the first conference. That's some of the papers people gave, and we've had publications come out, new friendships, obviously collaborations and books and all kinds of things, and some things in the future which I can't discuss yet. But we have lots planned going forward. But what has been exciting is that these events have grown so much and people are into them, and Agatha Christie is getting studied and read at universities now, which she was a bit when I started, but she was not 20 years ago. People were not taking her seriously, and now people are, and people are writing about her and discovering her as more than the very sensible lady who sat at her typewriter or surrounded by her own books, looking slightly overwhelmed by how much she'd written in that very famous photo. But people are seeing her as this really interesting woman who had these adventures. She was an archaeologist. She married twice when people didn't marry twice. She surfed. She drank cream instead of alcohol, which
I don't think that sounds very good, actually.
Well, it's not my cup. I mean, I'm lactose intolerant, so it would be terrible. But the fact that she did it is just amazing. I'm all for benevolent hedonism, because so many people would say that's unladylike, but she did it. So she's a wonderful force, and I think she is honoured brilliantly in a lot of the stuff that's going on, but including your book, I think is a lovely tribute to her and her legacy and her house, and just this excellent engagement with people. And I see I've been nattering on too long. So
that is fine. I think this is a great place to stop. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much. As I expected, it was a lot of fun to geek out with you about all things Agatha. I knew it would be.
And it was fun for us too. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jamie. Let's make one more plug for the book. Lori Rader-Day's new book about Agatha Christie and her house, one of many houses. Thank you so much, both of you. And thanks to everyone in the audience for sharing it with us. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. Have a good night, Jamie. Go to bed.